This program is divided into two coordinated parts. The first part is the PictureBox, which I created by dragging a PictureBox over and resizing it in the form. And the second is represented by this list box. In order to put pictures in the PictureBox, you need to go down to the images property, and if you notice right now, that property says that what's displayed is Soundplayer 01, which is the namespace of the main program. Then properties dot resources dot weight, and weight is the name of the picture itself. And the way I added this image to the PictureBox is I clicked on the ellipse initially, and that brought up a dialog that says select resource, and then I clicked on the import button, which allows me to select from the entire computer system. I could go to any directory and find a JPEG or a MP, a BMP, or a GIF or whatever. And in fact, the two I selected were these two that I pre-wrote for this. One's called wait, which sort of shows me waiting for something, and the second is called react, which shows me reacting. I know, if only they gave Emmys for YouTube. But once these are selected, they're added to the resource list box, and you select which one you want displayed, or you can select none if you want either one of them displayed. And once they're associated as a resource, you can actually delete the original picture and you'll still be able to access them. And the second part, the LBX sounds, is a list box of .wav files that get played by the program as it runs. And in order to populate this list box, we use the form load event handler. So I double click on the form at the bar at the top, and we go into the form load event handler. And first we have a directory info DI object that's instantiated on a directory called sounder. And if we look at that directory, it's actually a string constant that I have an @ sign so I can have back slashes within the string, and they're not treated as special escape characters. And this is a directory which in fact contains only .wav files, but just to play it safe, when I do the file info array of sounds based on the di.get files, I pass it a pattern of star.wave, so only wave files will be selected by the get files. Then I clear the list box and I do a for each going through each of the files in the file info array. It transfers sounds into the current variable sound, also referred to as a range variable, I think. And then it adds the name from the file info to the list box using sound.name and using the items.add method for the list box. And the main event we want to handle within the program is the selected index changing on the list box. And it turns out this is the default event handler for a list box. So if we double click on the list box, we'll go to that event handler, the LBX sounds select index changed. And the first thing we want to do is get the selected item, which is what's been clicked on in the list box, and we need to change it to a string because initially it's an object. So when we do the toString and put it in the cell item variable, we have the short name of the .wav. But in order to actually be able to access it by the Soundplayer, which is what we're going to use next, we need to translate this into a fully qualified name. So we take the fully qualified directory name that we used in the directory info and concatenate that with the plus symbol to the item selected name, and so that sound ends up having a fully qualified name. And before I go any further, you've got to notice that there's 3 usings that I added to this. The system.io, which allows us to use the directory info and the file info. Then the system.media, which allows us to use something called a Soundplayer, which basically would be a pretty useful utility, except all it can do is play .wav files, .wav. So it makes it kind of limited. You know, I as a general player, it's not that great, but if you're just going to play system sounds that are the WAV format, most things now are .mp3 format, which is about 10 times more compressed than .wav. .wav is like the full analog waveform. But the system.media allows us to use the Soundplayer, and then we also have a system.threading, and that allows us to use something called thread.sleep. And what thread.sleep does is it basically pauses for the number of milliseconds that you specify in it. So 300 milliseconds is around 1/3 of a second. And we actually don't need this for the program. You notice I have it commented out. But the reason it's there at all is there's the difference between synchronous and asynchronous processing that I've discussed in previous videos. And we instantiate the Soundplayer in an object called SP, and then we can say sp.playSync, which says hold up everything while this plays, or we can say sp.play, which becomes asynchronous, so that the main thread of the program continues running. And the problem with that is that we want to change the picture in the PictureBox based on the sound playing, and then change it back when the sound finishes playing. And if we use the asynchronous version, this will change so fast because it's running asynchronously that you won't even see a change. It'll just appear that the same picture was there all the time. So in order to show that, I could use the thread.sleep to show it change briefly, and then use the play to show that it is changing, but we can't see it. But you know, I'll leave that for you to demo yourself, you know, to uncomment those out and show that the asynchronous is kind of disastrous, since the play sync allows us to work correctly. And basically what happens when we do the selected index change is the image in the PictureBox gets changed to the React picture, and then we do a play sync so the React picture is on there as long as it's playing. And it's required to do a refresh. If you don't do a refresh, it doesn't change also, which is unfortunate, but I've seen that quite a few times. And then when it finishes playing, we set the image back to the original wait image and then do a refresh. So let's save and compile and run this and see if it actually works. See what's a good I think Ghost Whale is a good one. Or Foghorn. Well, you get the idea. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and learned a lot, and I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe.